Welcome back to our Q&R podcast. I'm Rebecca Hanna, the director of LSQ Kids here at Redeemer LSQ. Together with Michael Keller, we're framing this podcast for the seeker and skeptic in all of us. It's designed to foster a posture of curiosity about ourselves and about others. Last time we tackled one of the biggest challenges people have with the Bible, understanding the character of God in the Old Testament. And today we're taking on a whole other tough question: is the Bible anti-woman? Many people assume that Christianity has historically suppressed women, pointing to passages about submission and silence in the church, or even polygamy in the Old Testament. But is that actually what the Bible teaches, or is there more to the story? Well, in this episode, we'll explore how Jesus radically elevated the status of women, how the early church gave them leadership roles, and why a closer reading of Scripture reveals a deeply countercultural view of women's dignity and worth. Let's get started.
We're back.
We are back. I have mixed feelings about this episode.
Okay.
Because I am not the authority on this topic. And I just want to start off there.
And what topic are we dealing with
So
today?
The topic today is the Bible anti-woman? And there's a lot of different reasons why we're asking this question. We always start off with why are we asking this question? So why would we need to ask this question? Is the Bible anti-women?
And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are so many reasons why this question is being asked, and in the context that it's being asked is really important. So whether it's someone who's reading the Bible and walking away with that, thinking that way, or if someone's experiencing the church. And oftentimes I think there's a reality that there are all these different things at play, whether it's spiritual powers and principalities or brothers, even sisters in the church who do experience a scenario that feels very anti-women. And so then the question comes from there also.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of different ways to look at this. I mean, start with church history, and
Yes.
you have you don't have to look very far to acknowledge the harm done where women have been oppressed in societies, Western societies, ones that were Christianized, ones where the church was very much authoritative in that culture. Mm-hmm. So you have, it's a natural question to ask, is the Bible anti-women? Because you see Christians behaving badly and doing horrible, sexist, patriarchal things to hurt women. A. B. You look in the Bible and you see phrases. You see lots of Bible passages. We'll get to those passages in a little bit, but you see those and people go, "Wait a second, what is that? What's all that about? How's that going?" So yeah, I think this is a significant hurdle, particularly for people in the West, where equality and rights and are big cultural narratives that we live in right now, and we're saying, wait a second, there seems to be something funky going on in the Bible where men and women are not talked about as the same. There seems to be differences that are being highlighted, and so in our cultural background, when you use the phrase different and separate, we look at our own American history of racism and separation. So there's a reason why the history of women in the church and the history of race in the church, there's a lot of parallels when it comes to power and use. So I'll come out and say that's why we're talking about this topic, because it's a big deal, and this isn't just an intellectual theoretical thing. I think there's been a lot of women in the past and today, and will be in the future, that have been hurt on multiple levels by the institutions, individuals,
Yep.
and whatnot.
Yeah. I think for our focus right now in this particular scenario, because what you just opened a large can of worms.
I'm just saying it.
That I don't want to go swimming in. Yeah. So I think that for our purpose today, I want to go through a couple of objections that we read specifically in the Bible. The first one would then be this idea of submission.
Yeah.
The Bible still tells women to submit. So
This is Ephesians 5,
Yep.
1 Timothy 2.
Yep. So there's this reinforcement of male authority
Okay.
that I think brings a lot of confusion because of our context, of our culture, of our roles, even how we operate in the home, in the workplace. It just seems to not be cohesive with how we operate.
Right.
And I think that brings some confusion. So why don't we clarify some, like, what is this biblical submission?
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because I think it's really important to distinguish between the actions of fallible people and then the actual teachings of the Bible itself. Because if the Bible is true, then whatever it means to submit here is really, really important. Go to Ephesians 5. And if you read the text, sometimes you have to read it over and over and over again. Submission that women are being asked to do is in the context of mutual submission.
Yeah.
If it's one of the things I always tell people is it says submit to one another. And in the end, it says submit to one another. So there's a nice bracketedness. But the way men and women submit to one another are different. But there is submission. But it's important to say that this is not in a vacuum, that there's actually mutual submission going on here.
Yes. So I often like to say submission isn't actually about gender.
What do you mean?
I mean that submission is, it's a position that I'm in all of the time. And I'm not in a position of submission because I'm a woman. It's because I'm a human.
Right.
Right. And we submit one to another.
Yeah.
Unto what Jesus has called us to, right? So submission is the Christian way of life. It is really the way of life of everyone. Because everyone is if you have a job, you submit to your employer, right? We just don't, I think at the end, we don't like the word, right? It's become this synonym for domestic violence. It's a moniker for smothering women in the church. It's this word that we've come to not like, when in reality, that's not actually what it should even represent.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that any friendship has submission going on. You're submitting to the relationship.
I don't want to eat there tonight. I want to eat over here instead.
Yeah, there's a submission that happens there. I mean, I'm purposely not, you can't be in a relationship with anybody else unless you prioritize them. And hopefully they're prioritizing you, and that's how it works.
Yes.
But so submission has become a dirty word because of power and how it's been abused. That doesn't mean it in and of itself is wrong. My mom's favorite analogy is, when one of her sons, which happened to be me, picked up the Bible and started beating her other.
Literally beating.
Literally taking the. I took the Bible, nice big heavy book, and started hitting my brother over the head with it. Just because I hit my brother over the head with the Bible doesn't mean the Bible's wrong. It's how I used it was actually problematic. The way submission's been used and weaponized, you could argue is bad, but that doesn't mean in and of itself is a bad thing. Yeah. And I think where we have a trouble is in our culture, we think, we talk about both sides of our mouth. You said this in the last episode. On one level, we're very comfortable saying men and women are different. We have different brains, we have different bodies, we have different chromosomes, different. But then in another way, we say, no, there's no difference here. The Bible is very comfortable saying men and women are different. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Genesis 1 and 2, when it says, I'm going to make a helper. For us, we always get our knickers, in a twist. That's another phrase from my mother, because we think of helper as subservient. But the biblical word for helper, the Hebrew word, used around 100 times, 90 times out of 100, it's almost always used about God. God is my helper, which means, God's not subservient. So what it means is the word helper is somebody who brings something to the table that you don't have. So if men and women are different, they bring something different to the table they don't have, then it's okay then that submission will look different and roles will look different. And I think people have a hard time with that because when you say different, that usually is translation, one's better than the other. And that's for me where I really struggle because I know theoretically difference shouldn't have to mean unequal, but the way it ends up being mitigated often in our culture, it has been that way.
Yeah, I think too that a critical piece to this is ultimate submission is what brings us the gospel in Jesus. So Amen. Jesus submitted himself
Yeah.
which means that we should all be submitting
Philippians, yeah.
to each other. And so there's this sense in which I think we need to reclaim that word, that it is not a moniker for smothering women. It's actually what we are all doing one to another all of the time.
Properly, yeah.
And there is a really beautiful thing about, when Jesus submitted to the Father, he wasn't less than the Father.
Yeah.
He's equal to him in every way,
Yeah.
actually. But on earth, he had a different role to play than the Father. And so he obeyed the Father. It wasn't because he was intimidated by him. He wasn't rendered silent or passive, right? He wasn't bitter because God asked him to die for us. And he did plead with him in relationship for a different way to happen.
Yeah.
But ultimately, he submitted himself unto death. And so that's a beautiful picture of, it's this actually selfless act of submission that Christians get the privilege of having because of the Spirit God.
And I know we're on a different topic, but I think I still want to make this point. The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are different. They're different, but unity. There's unity and diversity inside the Godhead, and we're made in God's image. And so therefore we should expect, when it says, let us make mankind in my image, he's not saying, if his image is plural, then it should make sense that we too will have differences, but still equality. There's equality in the Godhead, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, but there's also difference. And so there's something really beautiful. We love diversity in biodiversity. We want to see diversity in cuisine. We want to see diversity. We love diversity. So why is it so bad that we have diversity in our gender, sexuality?
Yeah.
I mean, it is. And so it's fascinating. We live in a world that's trying to, at least in the Western world, trying to scrub any difference of gender because it's been abused so much.
Yes.
But it doesn't you end up losing all the beauties of uniqueness of what it means to be female and all the uniqueness of what it means to be male and celebrating those things instead of, I think you run away from that. I think a lot of times the position of saying, hey, there's no difference here, you lose some of the cool particularities because we've done such a bad job of doing it well. So I know it's not... But I think this needs to be said because of some of the answers people are going to start saying is, but it's been abused, it's been misused. 100%.
100%, yes.
But that doesn't mean there's not beauty that's actually we could hold on to if we actually did it the right way.
Yeah. I think the important thing to say, too, is that submission is not rooted in a difference of value.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it creates a relational structure that's needed for us to function in the glory of God, and that from the big picture of the glory of God all the way to, if we're constantly fighting over who's doing what, then that's going to be a problem across the board, right? It just doesn't always work that way, right? You have a leader as a tyrant, or or a tyrant as a leader. You have authorities that are incompetent or destructive, and I think that leaves us to the question of, then why would I even submit? You as my pastor are not perfect.
Yeah, amen to that.
Right. But I'm still going to submit myself to the authorities, and that scares people when I say that.
Well, and the authority is supposed to submit to the church, But
you're not perfect.
Right.
I'm not perfect. My children still submit to me, right? The reality is that we don't submit one just to another, but we submit ultimately to Jesus.
But that's beautiful.
We're trusting
There's people who
Jesus.
say, I'll only submit if I know that's going to be mitigated perfectly, but the answer is that never happens, and that doesn't. It's
not about the fitness of the leader.
Great point.
It's about the faithfulness to the perfect Jesus.
That's a great point.
And that's really important.
So another objection that people say is, well, what about all the women that have had to work in a patriarchal system?
Yeah.
You have look at the Old Testament, and you see women regulated everywhere, and the Bible seems to be depicting this apparatus. Is that what the Bible wants today? Is it trying to put a particular culture on us, or is it cultural neutral? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that objection.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know a whole lot about this in terms of details and the nitty-gritty of what you're talking about. I do think that there is a reality that the ancient patriarchy is different, even though we still have a taste of it today.
Well, I would argue that ancient patriarchy, if submission is supposed to be mutual, there was a way to submit 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, that would have been right. That doesn't mean it was actually mitigated and ruled the right way. See, this gets to that conversation. I feel like we say almost every episode, the Bible is descriptive, not prescriptive. It describes how people did things. It doesn't necessarily, you have to really look at the codes and the laws. And the laws and codes talk about equality, talk about how we're supposed to be spitting to each other. And then you look at how the redemptive historical movement actually happened and how Jesus revealed himself only to women first as a way to kind of go against the patriarchy that didn't validate women in the law courts at the time. And then you look at Paul serving with Priscilla and Aquila and all these women and deaconesses and okay, go on.
I'm smiling because
you're going to say something here.
You know, I want to come back to the question. The question is the Bible anti-woman?
Yeah, that's the main question.
As I hear we're talking about the patriarchy, I wanted, before we even started, I was like, I could get myself in so much trouble. Not because I think that the Bible is, I do not believe the Bible is anti-woman. But I do believe that we are often in settings and have experiences that do feel anti-woman. Because we have...
Through the Bible? Because of the Bible?
Not because of the Bible. And I think that's a clear distinction that we need to make, particularly with the patriarchal system, because I can feel that way. Yeah. But I need to separate that out from what the Bible is actually saying is true.
Just because somebody's misused a system doesn't mean it in and of itself is wrong, the submission.
And there are ingredients left that we experience today from a patriarchal system, 100%.
Well, I mean, depending on who you talk to, some would say it's still up and going, just the same, or some would say it's better.
I'm not willing to make a definitive statement on that.
We don't need to.
However, so I think that's really important to clarify of, yes, we still operate in some, it's like women's rights. Think about the role even Christianity had in women's rights and bringing women's rights to bear. I have 3 girls, okay? I mean, I am
have 2.
You have 2. We are a girl, mom, and dad here. Like, I am pro women all day long. I love women. So it's this sense in which I don't want to deny that there are problems with the way that we operate. From the local church to the broader church to cultural to society in the workplace. I think there are problems across the board everywhere with this. But I think the answer actually is in the Bible. It's not anti-woman. It's actually pro-woman. And so how do we take what's true in Scripture and bring it over here and live it out better?
Well, and I think where we struggle with this, and I don't want to, again, this is a whole different topic, and I think we've touched on it in some other episodes. If the Bible's true, and it says all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and we're dead in our transgressions, and those aren't just individuals, but whole cultures, that means our culture should be, and yet God, when he made us good. It was good, it was good, it was good. So if you want to zoom out and sort of look at it over the trajectory of all of human history, that means every civilization is some beautiful and broken mixture of good and bad. And every culture has that. And we struggle because we want to say something's all good or all bad because it makes it a lot easier. But that's just not the way it is. You, Becca Hannah, are a mixture of good and bad. I am too. But so's Western civilization. So's Eastern civilization. So's capitalism. So's any ism out there has aspects that are good and aspects that are bad. You could actually argue murder is just authority gone bad. It wasn't initially bad to have authority, but when you say, I know that this person shouldn't live anymore, that's murder. Pornography is sexuality gone bad, but there's a good aspect of it because God made us to connect. So that means patriarchy, whatever you want to call it, all of our cultures, we're struggling with this because the church today or our culture today is a combination of good and bad, which means there's something beautiful about submission that is good and right, that the Bible prescribes and says you should do it. But there's also, varying degrees from awful to slightly less awful of mitigating and actually living that stuff out. And I think we have to hold those things together.
We do. In our last episode, too, we talked about the Bible not approving of everything it records. And I think oftentimes when people are talking about the Bible and being anti-women, they're pulling from things that the Bible's recorded.
Recording it, but not actually prescribing it.
The character of God doesn't prescribe. And if you watch Jesus...
he prescribes the very submission he asks of men and women.
Yes, he does. And he also elevates women time and time again. Throughout the, you read story after story where he's radically elevating the dignity of women over and over again. And so there's a sense in which it's that prescriptive versus descriptive. And we got to be really careful not to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think those are some of the early objections that we have about, how do we even start talking about these things? Let's go to some of the key problematic passages, just for people to say, what are you actually talking about, Michael? Mm-hmm. Well, one is in Genesis 3, where it says the curse after Adam and Eve fall. It says, Adam, you toiling the ground is going to suck. But then it says to the women, or to Eve, you're going to desire to be for your husband. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like, well, God's, codifying power differential. And the answer is, to some degree, yeah, there's a natural consequence to the way we do relationships now are all broken, and that's all power. Like humanity's relationship to creation is broken, hence creation doesn't work for them, the thorns and thistles, but also between men and women now. And I don't think I have to make much of an argument here to say that the relationship between men and women is still broken, and how we treat each other and how we see each other. Then you also have not just Genesis 3, but 1 Timothy 2, 11 through 14, where Paul instructs women to learn quietly and submissively, not to teach or have authority over men. And I think that's the other one.
Yeah. So just like everything we're always talking about, context matters.
Yep.
Like this is Paul's letter to Timothy in Ephesus, right? And he's writing this to instruct Timothy on how to handle specific issues in the church of Ephesus at the time. And in the church at that time, do you remember what was happening? Pop quiz.
There was, everything teachings. Was, everything was, go ahead.
Yeah, well, there were false teachings coming from particular women at that moment.
Lots of funkiness.
And it was actually, I think I'm right about this, it was the home of a cult. Wasn't it Artemis?
Artemis. That was Ephesians.
Where female priests were dominating.
Yeah, there was
that. So he was speaking to a specific problem at that particular moment. So I think that's important to understand in that context.
I think there, again, I touched on it earlier. Paul was Jewish. He knew the biblical created order. He knew about the Adam and Eve, and they're equal but different, and they have different roles. And so he was. I don't want to fully go away from that. He was also probably still talking about there are differences in how the men and women operate. I think this is where, I will just say it for the people probably listening, there are different church traditions that differ on this passage. Some people would say, hey, this is actually roles of women inside the church, and therefore you don't have no women elders. Other people would say that you can't just explain away. Other people would say, no, he's just talking about, this is just localized to a particular group of people, and therefore it's not actually applied, and therefore you can't have women elders and stuff like that. So we just need to say that's where the difference happens.
Yes. So I think we want to understand the context, though, because it's important to understand who he's speaking to, why he's speaking to them. And I think we can go then to the phrase, the assume authority phrase, and what it actually means to assume authority.
Okay.
So in verse 12, it's talking about what does it mean to assume authority over another person?
Right.
I mean, to me, it would be to dominate, to, usurp authority.
Yeah.
I think of a tyrant who's coming in and saying, it's mine, not yours, I'm taking over. It really implies a hostile or abusive environment where it's mine, not yours, get out of the way.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important, it's not necessarily, I think, the same word used for authority across the board in the New Testament.
I vaguely remember that. I don't, but I'm not going to stake my life on that one.
Yeah, I'm not a language expert either, but but the thing that Paul's really prohibiting is not leadership across the board. Everywhere.
Well, yeah, I mean, he praises Priscilla,
yes.
Aquila, which we've already said. He references women that are doing clearly ministry in other contexts in different places. So. Deacon, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you've got Priscilla, you've got Phoebe, you've got, was it Genua? I never know how to say her name. How do you say it?
Close enough.
Junia?
Close enough.
You're not going to say. I'm trying to get you to say it out loud.
Mm-mm.
You're not going to say it.
Mm-mm.
But I think there's an affirmation of women teaching. It's also just logical, right? You and I are friends.
Right.
Our spouses are friends. Our families hang out together. We have lots of conversations about all kinds of things: parenting, the Bible, the church, fill in the blank, whatever you and I are writing on. You and I are having conversations all of the time.
Yeah.
It would be foolish to say that I am not learning from you and you are not learning from me.
Right.
And so it cannot be that men and women are not supposed to learn from each other.
Right. I think the rubber meets the road on this issue is where you have authority and when. And some traditions say it's in the preaching context, in the service of a church, right? My mom is on record saying that a woman can do anything inside the church that a man can do. That's unordained. So ordination is sort of the line. Well, what's ordination? It's being set apart. It's the role of elder. But then you have the Anglican Church where there's male bishops, but even though there's female priests, because there's authority kind of structures and lines in that way. And we're trying to summarize lots of different traditions in different ways, but what Becca's saying, what I'm saying is that it'd be foolish to say that men and women don't learn from each other in different contexts. Mm. The question is what contexts matter. And I still remember my mother, when I've talked to her about this topic, she said that she sat in seminary class and they went through every single Bible passage about women, and by the end of it, the conclusion was there's difference between men and women, not just how they submit, but how they actually function. But that difference is not bad or subservient. It's just different because it takes different roles for things to actually to run anything, whether it's a home or a business or a church, whatever you want to take it. So where do you draw the line on how those roles mitigate? I think there's some ambiguity, but I don't think there's a debate that there is a difference in when it comes to men and women.
Well, and when we're talking about, is the Bible anti-woman?
Yeah,
I'm going to come back to that every single time.
Yeah, because that's the question.
Well, I cannot answer this question.
Is the Bible anti-women if the Bible is just saying there's differences in different roles that people should run?
No, but I think we ask this question because of our experience, not because of what we read.
Got it.
So if you knew my story and the nitty-gritty details of how I've been treated as a woman in the church without knowing what the Bible also says, and you just connect my experience and say that's the Bible, you're going to say it feels like the Bible might be anti-woman. Right? Because I am in a fallen world and in a fallen system with fallen men and women across the board. Yeah. And by the way, I've been treated that way just as much by women as I have by men.
Right.
So we have misapplied scripture. We've done a very incredibly poor job of understanding this across the board. That being said, going back to the Bible, there are biblical examples time and time again where women were not sidelined in God's plan. In fact, they were pivotal roles. So women, I don't think that by leading it's defying the norm. It's actually by executing the gifts that God has given us within the norm, like within the role, within the guidelines, right, of what I know I can do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's really important context to hear, because just because there's been mistreatment, misuse, doesn't mean the Bible's anti-women.
Deborah in the Bible.
Old Testament.
Yes, tell me about Deborah.
Well, I mean, we've already talked about some of the things in the Old Testament about equality and about what helper means, but I think you see Deborah, you see all these different examples of women leading.
She was a judge.
Some would say the fact that Deborah was leading as a judge, who it was supposed to be in the Old Testament, a ruler for Israel, that things were really, really bad if there was, because there was, a woman leading and not a man leading in this particular case. Some say that. Other people say, well, at least validates that women are leading here. But at the very least, it actually shows that between Abigail and Ruth and all these different types of Esther, there's lots of examples of women that are doing God's work, bringing God's kingdom into fruition. I don't know if Deborah is leading. I'm being a little coy here because I've seen arguments of, well, that's because Deborah was leading doesn't mean it was a good thing. You might disagree with me right here on.
Well, I mean, I think that's the descriptive prescriptive thing that we've been talking about.
Yeah, it definitely, she was leading there. The question was, was that grounds for why you? Yeah.
I don't think that we can say it's grounds for anything. I think it's what happened, and it's a story that we read. And so when we start taking it as a prescriptive, either direction, we get in trouble.
Yeah.
I do want to talk about Rahab because I think she's really an important, in terms of, is the Bible anti-woman? I think it's a beautiful way that God's word actually takes a woman who has no business being in the lineage of Jesus.
Right.
And he's like, she's the fire starter.
Yeah.
So talk to me about Rahab.
I mean, you have a person who's on the outside on every level. She's a Gentile. She's her business would be considered outside the realm of.
And her business was
sexual infidelity.
Yep.
Everything about her was actually on the outside, and
she was a Canaanite woman.
Yeah, she was inside her. Why am I blanking? Her apartment, her home was inside the city wall. Mm-hmm. She covers for the Israelites who are trying to get into the land of Canaan, and she says, "Remember me, but I'll help you out." And she says, "You are God," and she makes actually a statement of faith, proclaims it, and God uses a woman who's on the outside in every single way to bring His covenantal blessing and furthering of God's redemptive history through her. So it's this beautiful example of God using women,
unlikely women.
Yeah, who you wouldn't expect it, and you see this in his lineage, in Jesus' lineages, right? As you just said that in Matthew 1,
which means that Jesus comes out of the lineage of Rahab.
Yeah.
So that's the Old Testament. I want to move to the New Testament because I think that you see this women playing pivotal roles in the Old Testament that we read as it's just the story that is. And then we see Jesus' his interaction with women in the New Testament.
Yeah.
And I love reading about Jesus interacting. I think about the woman at the well. I think about the bleeding woman.
John
I think
4.
about Mary and Martha. He really responds differently to each one of them. Yeah. And it's a really holistic picture, a beautiful picture of even how pastors can love women in their congregation.
Yeah.
But in friendship, you think about Jesus' friendship with Mary and Martha.
Yeah.
And that to me is this, if Jesus truly saw women as inferior, why would he engage with them so personally and elevate them
Reveals
in
himself
ministry?
Post-resurrection to them first.
Yep.
They were included in his discipleship groups. This is Luke 8, verses 1 through 3. I think it's Luke 11, John 11, when Mary and Martha both come to Jesus with the exact same phrase. If you read it, it's kind of fun. If you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. And he gives Martha basically a Bible study. I'm the resurrection. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. And then Mary says the same thing. He just cries with her, which is a beautiful way of him knowing exactly what each person needs at the time. Sometimes you need a word. Sometimes you need a hug and some tears. So over and over again, you just see a validation. In the Catholic tradition, you have Mary, his mother, elevated. But at the very least, you just see overall in the New Testament, the biblical direction of history, including women.
Well, and I think that's important because this relational aspect between Jesus and women is a picture of how men and women should actually be in friendship today. Yeah. And I think that is done very poorly.
What do you mean by how men and women should be in friendship today?
Well, there is a brother and sister relationship that I think we should have in the church. And as helpers and submitters to one to another, we need each other. 5. Yeah. Like we need men and women. We need to understand that we are a full body, right? You can't have all of the women operating as one half of the body and then all the men operating as, we're not two different bodies. We are an integrated body.
And Paul even uses that, right? In Romans 12, he says, everybody, the hand can't say the eye, what the heck, why aren't you gripping anything? We all have different, the reason why that analogy really matters is that he's pointing out that there are different aspects and roles that we each have that we need to do, and one's not better than the other.
Yes.
And I think you said it earlier, but or maybe it was off before we started talking. But that Jesus, the fact that he submitted, he doesn't do anything that he doesn't ask every man and woman to do as well. Mm-hmm. He's not So I think this is such a hard topic to talk about because it's been so misused and abused.
Yes.
And the last thing I want is to communicate that the way we've handled submission to each other is good. It hasn't been, but that doesn't mean that there's not beauty. When I've seen in my marriage, when I've seen in friendship between men and women submitting to each other with their different gifts, there's just such beauty. I've seen it in my own church when women say, "Hey, there's a big deal here. This is something that needs to happen," and men listening, and then vice versa. It's just some beautiful stuff going on because we see things differently. We act different. We literally have different brains. My wife did her master's, and some of her classes were on educational differences in men and women, and the way we listen and hear words get processed in different places, the way we see things, the way that's okay that there's these differences because that's going to bring out different outcomes and different artistry that I think is beautiful. And I think that's why we need each other in these spaces. Yeah.
And I do think that because we are created in the image of God and we then are representative of an infinitely creative God, we all have different gifts. And so I think about in my marriage, there are things that my husband is good at that I am not, and there are things that I'm good at that he's not, and we're going to submit to each other in those particular areas.
Yeah.
I'm trying to decide if I actually want to admit what these things are first.
Well, but there's also I'll cut you off because there's not as a man, but
great.
Good. Here we go again. No, but there's a wisdom issue of like what does this look like, right?
Yeah.
Like in what place? Because I think people with all good intentionality still mess up on it.
Abuse looks like I'm not doing that, you're doing that because you are. Like if I looked at my husband and said, I'm not taking out the trash, you're taking out the trash, you're a man, you take out the trash. Mm-hmm. That's just like him looking at me going, I'm not doing the laundry, you do the laundry. You're
right.
That is a traditionalist perspective from like having nothing to do with submission or the Bible.
Can I tell you a funny quick? I don't want to cut you off, but I'm doing it again. It's the second time. Okay, man, I better stop. You finish. Now I'm overly sensitive. You go ahead.
What's funny?
Well, when my wife and I first got married, we were like, you know what? Let's forget these traditional roles. I said to Sarah, I'm going to try cooking and cleaning. And because I want to learn how to cook and clean and do a better job at that. And how about you pay the bills and you work on the finances because that'll help you get better at that so you know where all the money's going. Like 3 months in, the bills weren't being paid. We were paying fees. The house was a mess. It wasn't being cleaned. If we weren't really eating well, and we were like looking at each other like, can we flip these? And because we both realized we had roles to play.
Yes. But in other marriages, that's exactly opposite.
What do you mean?
There are men who are great cooks and women who are like, I'm not doing that today.
I tried. It didn't work for me. But
yes.
And now
my husband does the laundry.
More power to him.
Period. He just does. I work a lot. I'm doing there are things that he doesn't do too, that I do instead of him. So there's just a sense in which we try to say that this is the way it should be, and that is not a prescriptive from the Bible, making the Bible anti-woman.
So I can hear the listeners going, "It's fine. This is so fun for you and Becca to talk about this, but
to rag on our spouses."
But then where's the line? Where do we actually do this?
Yeah.
And so in my tradition, I try to honor the Bible where there's a difference. The way we do it in our church is we don't have women pastors. We have women leaders in so many different aspects of the church, but we try to say, hey, we're trying to honor this difference, it's not because the pastoral role is better. It's not because there's not women who can, speak and teach and move people's hearts and stuff like that. It's not that at all. It's just trying to say, let's try to actually do this, and with these differences. But I know not everybody agrees with that interpretation.
So for people who are listening to that, I was just saying one of my best friends is a female pastor, and I love her to death. I love hanging out with her because we have incredible conversations. That's really unique. But I also think that when people hear that, they're going, okay, well, I learned from Becca on the podcast, or I'm writing a book. If you pick up my book and you read it and you're a man, and are you supposed to say I'm not going to learn anything from it? Or am I just not supposed to read the book? So when people push back on that, I teach parenting classes for our church. There are men sitting. How do you then justify that?
Well, in my tradition, it's
our tradition because I work at your church.
I know.
So
sorry.
Claim it for your church.
I don't want to force. Thank you for saying that. But I didn't want to assume that I was going to force that on you.
Well,
you're like, it already is because I know you're employed. You did.
Willingly so.
Willingly so. For us, it's the worship service, ordination. There's a lot more than just happens just on Sunday, right? As far as leaders from the church, but for us, that would be the line of demarcation in difference. It's not in teaching; it's in preaching. It's in administering the sacraments. It's in church discipline. It's in the session leadership. Although we have women who do come to those meetings, and we do hear their input, which lets us be
on a regular basis.
Yeah, which lets us be able to make decisions better.
Yeah. So I think for a woman who's listening to this and thinking that's a problem for me, how would you encourage them?
What's a problem for them?
It's a problem for me that a woman is not going to preach at your church on Sunday morning.
I think this is where we have to have charity with each other. I went to Gordon Conwell, which was a non-denominational seminary. There was women that were there that were wrestling with the same biblical issues, trying to figure out what is the Bible actually trying to say. We're trying to be faithful to the Scriptures. Yet there's a level of humility of saying I could be wrong about this on all levels. Everybody should be able to say that to each other. If you're not convicted about this, to your point, I have people on both sides of the aisle on this. So I think the charity needs to be there for each other, that we're trying to be faithful to the Scriptures and map it out, but we could be wrong. And I think this is one of those things that you can also agree to disagree. I don't think this is not a salvific issue. Yeah. This is, I do think that there's places of abuse. You can abuse the submission thing, but you can abuse it by also having too low a level of hey, there is no difference between men and women, and actually not honoring our created differences. So I think you can make error on either side. And
what's interesting about this, because I work with a lot of different women in ministry. I've done a lot of coaching for women in ministry, and I've coached women who are pastors, and I've coached women who are in scenarios where they would not be functioning as a pastor, because they are more in line with what you're saying. And I think the misinterpretations of Scripture for how women should be treated, the dark parts of working for a church or being employed anywhere, for the record, is hard no matter where you land. And there are abuses happening on both sides of that. It's not just on one side or the other side. And I think it's hard. It's just hard in general. It's not hard because you land on this side of the issue and someone else lands on this side of the issue. I think doing church is hard no matter where you are, because people are flawed no matter. This is a secondary issue. It's not a primary gospel issue, in my opinion. And so I want to be clear that even it's fascinating, because when you're working with women in an egalitarian church, which is the fullness of authority there, and then in a complementarian church, which is what you described, there are issues on both sides, not having to do necessarily with women's roles, but with how people are treated, period.
Yeah.
And we want to make it a women's issue. And oftentimes it does feel that way. And there are plenty of those. But I think there are issues with people because we're people. We're broken people.
Well, and I like that you said that, Becca. I think what we're struggling with is if the biblical principle is men and women are equal but different. And I think hopefully nobody argues that. I mean, I think a pretty strong Science kind of shows that there's difference.
Kind of.
Kind of shows that. I think the Bible shows that. But we struggle with how to execute that. If men and women are equal but different, the minute you say that phrase, you see, I think that's why our culture struggles with this as a whole. That's why we say, well, no, they just stop halfway. They go, men and women are equal, period. They don't want to add that extra phrase. But if you don't add that extra phrase, you actually deny and do injury to our created beauties that are different. Mm-hmm. That's why you have to add that extra phrase. Mm-hmm. But if you do add that extra phrase, because we're in the still fallen world, the way we execute it, whether it's, you brought up a complementarian church, which is a fancy word for having more, what's a regulation of how we actually have our roles inside the church versus an egalitarian church that has less of that. You're gonna mess up that on that, and that is not ground for I'm just gonna execute out. No, you have to pick, and you have to come to the Bible. See, I think people can be biblically faithful. I think we can be. Somebody's gonna be wrong because there's not one. Somebody's more wrong in here than not.
You're having to pick which side to err on.
Yeah, and the good news is I think you have to. You're not saved by your right understanding of Scripture. You're saved by grace, and so I'm gonna try the best I can. And I'm going to try to live it out in the most gracious, loving way. And I hope we can do that.
Well, so let's end with this question here.
Okay.
How then should we correct, or can we correct, misunderstandings about the Bible and women in our conversations?
I'm going to let you take since you asked the question.
No. I asked the question so that you would answer.
No, that doesn't work always that way. Your turn.
Well, if we think about the context.
I want you to go first.
Yeah. we are going to get in so much trouble. In the context of this question, is the Bible anti-woman?
Yeah.
I think it's really important for us to silo that question to what we're actually asking instead of filling in the blanks with our experience. And so one way we can correct misunderstandings is by actually going to the Bible, by actually reading the Bible, instead of reading the Bible in light of our experiences. And that's an important thing for us to do. If I read the Bible, if I took my experiences instead of reading the Bible and made those be what I thought was true, I wouldn't be sitting here anymore. Mm-hmm. Because I have been treated so poorly. I've been treated so poorly because I'm a person, because I'm a human, and because I'm working with other people who are also broken, fallen humans. And then also because I'm a woman, and because we've made it harder for women to be in the church in so many different contexts. That's true.
Yeah.
So I think the way that we correct misunderstandings is by having biblical friendship, by having good, full conversations about this that are rooted in love, knowing that we want to learn from each other.
Well, you said two things there. One is we correct it by having biblical friendships, but two is you actually go to the Bible itself. And I think it's I have to say this one more time. The Bible doesn't say anywhere women are supposed to submit to men. It doesn't actually say that. It actually only says, in Ephesians 5, the context is marriage, and 1 Timothy 2, the context, I think, is the church. We can agree to disagree on that, but what's critical here, and understand that the Bible does not actually just say all women are supposed to submit to all men.
Correct.
It doesn't do that. The Bible does not, frankly, it just doesn't say that. In fact, if you go to 1 Corinthians 7, one of the craziest passages I think that contextually in the Bible is it says there that the husband's body belongs to the wife and the wife's body belongs to the husband. In the ancient Near East back then, 2,000 years ago, everybody would have understood the woman's body because of the patriarchy. Nope, the fact that it says the man's body belongs, people would have been like, what are you talking about? It was radically mutual, but it was the context was, even though 1 Corinthians 7 says, hey, that's equal, there was still the difference of how the submission actually played itself out. Mm-hmm. And so I just think it's really important that the Bible doesn't oppress women. Christians certainly have, because Christians haven't lived out the essence of what the actually Bible says. So, I think that's just really important to say that there's a lot more to be said about this. I know we've already played out some of the differences of how it actually executes, but to that original question, no, I think that the Bible is radically and beautifully affirming to both our differences, but also to our beauties and sameness. And just like the Trinity is unity and diversity, we're trying to figure out how to do the unity and diversity thing, and we've done a terrible job up to this point. And yet, because I believe in the gospel and grace, I think we can try again and try to do it better. And I appreciate I know you're on staff, but we're literally trying to do it again, trying to do it better, versus the way it's been done in the past. So, yeah. Thanks for having this convo. I don't know if we definitely didn't solve all the problems.
We haven't scratched the surface.
But I think we did lay out the essence of the issues.
We started the conversation.
Yeah. Well, you want to finish it?
I don't think we can do that right now.
All right.
I think we got as far as we can.
Thanks, Becca, for this convo.
Thanks for listening to our Q&R podcast. We hope this episode encourages you as we process questions together. For more episodes, visit our profile on Spotify or our YouTube channel.